Today we have the Ferrari Sony stereo here in the shop. The model number is XR-F20. This is known for several common problems. One is the tape not working, and the other is no power. I can help with one of these problems, one I am unable to help with. The cassette problems is usually a cracked piece of plastic, which is no longer available, so the cassette can't be repaired. But we're going to show you the power problem. I would say this probably takes care of this radio about 90% of the time. And we're going to start with removing the top cover. And right off we can see signs of some minor water damage across the back cover here as well, and along the case. Next we're going to remove the face. Set that aside so it doesn't get scratched up. And then we're going to remove the plastic trim. This one has two pieces of trim. This one happens to still have the plastic trim on it. This should usually snap right off. And if we can get it to snap here on the side. There we go. And the trim ring will come off. You're either going to have the stereo in the shop with the trim ring on or with it off. And we've also noticed here that there is a little water damage here on the top. The problem is on the main motherboard in this radio, so we're going to remove 6 screws across the front, 2 here on the very right, 2 across the center here. These 2 hold the cassette mechanism in place along with 2 others. And there are 4 over on the left area. 2 are the same size as the other 4, and then there are 2 smaller ones. The 2 smaller ones hold the locking bracket on, so we're going to leave these attached. We're just going to remove the other 6 screws here, the 4 that secure the face and the 2 that secure the front of the cassette mechanism. This is a radio we see in shop probably once a year, and it just so happens today, for the first time ever, we have 2 of these in shop with the same problem. We have a full library of removal guides on our website. See our website. If you have any help with other vehicles that need removal instructions or help with removing a radio and so on, there is some do-it-yourself repairs and so on as well on other vehicles and radios. And we are adding more. You're welcome to comment on the video. If you have questions, please email us or give us a call. That'll get your quickest response. We've been seeing these radios for quite a few years. We get to learn the common problems with them. We were unable to locate schematics on it because of the Ferrari name, but we did find schematics on several others that were very similar, and they did not help as well. But the cassette problem, like I said, has a plastic piece in the mech that's cracked. Now we're going to remove the entire face here. Remove these 6 screws so we know where they go back to. The screws on this mechanism on this radio are somewhat different, so keep track of what you have removed. Now we're going to set this to the side as well. We're going to come to the front here, and we have 2 connections here. We have a ribbon cable on the right that comes off the head that goes directly into the circuit board. And we have a wired connector that comes out of the mechanism right to the motherboard as well. We're going to lift this little guide here, a little black guide. What it does is hold the wires down so it doesn't get into the cassette mechanism. And we're going to see how close we can get down to this connector and pull it out by pulling on these wires, and that will release this side. Now the side with the head on it, we're going to take our little pick tool. Because this connector sits in a little connector that you have to lift both sides of this connector up, probably about 1/8 of an inch. And when both sides release up, this will release the connector. And in order to put this connector back in, you have to put the connector in and push the collars down. Now I've removed the ribbon cable, 2 more screws here in the back. So far all the screws for taking that front face off were black. The back 2 here on the cassette mechanism are a silver screw, so we're going to keep these with the others and make sure we don't get them mixed up. This is going to allow you to lift the cassette mechanism right up out. Next, to get the motherboard out, we have the back of the radio that has many screws across it. They're holding the connectors in place. They're holding the connectors here, the output IC, and the main connector along with the antenna connection. But there are 3 across the back that have a double arrow. One is here on the back top right, one is here through the center, and one is here on the left side. There is a fourth with a triangle on it, but we're not worried about this one. We just want the 3 with the double arrows to be removed. What this is going to do is release this back heatsink from the frame of the radio and allow us to free up the back portion here so we can remove the motherboard. We remove the front face because of the black connector that goes through. The front face will not allow you to lift the motherboard up out of the case here when we get all the screws removed. Now these screws are 3 screws that are of longer length that go into the heat sink on the back, so we're going to keep these 3 screws separate as well. And once we remove these 3 screws, move to the motherboard. The motherboard has 4 screws with washers on them, and they are straight down in the motherboard. One in the back left here. We're going to remove this screw. Again, this screw is different. We're going to keep it separate. One on the front left here, up next to the reset switch that has the opening through the front panel. One way over here on the right, next to the face connector. And we have a 4th, which is way over here in the back right. We're going to remove this screw as well. This cassette mechanism, when it sits down, is bolted to these 2 brass fittings that come up through the motherboard, and they are riveted into the case. So the reason for removing all these screws is so that you can loosen this board up and pull it straight up over those cassette mountings and remove the board. And we're going to set the case aside and point out the problems here. One thing we've noticed every once in a great while, there are several transistors on the back. There's surface mount. I can see one here, one here, one here, here, and a smaller one over there. You want to check all these transistors. There's one over here on this right side as well. Make sure nobody let the smoke out of them. In other words, make sure they're not burnt. If they're burnt, usually you'll see a burn hole on the circuit board and a big hole in the transistor as well. I don't have schematics on this, so that part is not available. The most common problems we see with this is this large capacitor in the back here can sometimes leak acid and eat the circuit board. So first thing we're going to do is remove the big capacitor in the back of the radio here and give it a good visual inspection, see if there's any deterioration or any other forms of debris or the board deteriorating. And this one looks very clean. Now we're going to, when we removed this, we were to take notes to show that the plus is on the right. This capacitor has a negative down one side, so when you go back to the board and see the plus sign is the side that's not labeled, so it has to go back in, the negative to the other side. Now we're going to do the same here with this small component here in the front. This is somewhat of a capacitor. It holds the memory sometimes for the memory presets and so on. And we're going to remove this component. I did mention earlier signs of minor water damage on this radio, and it seems like looking closely there is a little water damage under this component as well. And we're going to remove the component. We're also going to clean this component up because usually there is some corrosion here on it. We can bend the legs back a little bit to clean it up, get our chemical in there and spray this and clean it up as well. This cleans up any corrosion that is started. It'll also help with any future corrosion and so on. Again, the water damage seems to be the most problem with this, but this component does lead to other problems. And if you look closely at the board, yeah, right down where it solders in, here we go, right down about here is some corrosion. It could be leakage from this component, and it also looks like somewhat water damage as well. So we're going to clean this section of the circuit board up. Normally what we find here is an open trace right here under this component, and that causes the no power problem. So we're going to clean the traces up in the circuit board up and get a closer look at this, see which trace is open. Probably put a jumper across it and get it back together here. Okay, looking closely, there is an open trace here that takes the power to the chip that's over here. for power supply, I can see an open trace. Don't know if you can see it there. The open trace is right down here in the under this component. So we're going to resolder this component. We're going to put a jumper in across this connection so it continues to make connection from one point to the other, along with the opening goes to one of the legs on this component, the on this particular trace. Usually it's one of the traces that's a little bit higher above the component that we find open. But open trace is always a good find. Now we've fixed the trace under the component here in the front. We've reinstalled the rear component in the back. We're going to make sure that this connector over here that the ribbon cable off the head goes into, you can get a closer look at it now that it's out. There is a little collar, like I mentioned, on it that lifts up, and you need it in the up position in order to put the cassette mechanism, or hook the wire cable up back from the cassette mechanism. I'm going to place this back in over the two mounting shafts for the cassette mechanism. Put this in place. Reinstall the 4 screws here that secure the motherboard to the case. Remember, these 4 screws that go down are the ones with the washers on it. Next, we're going to put the 3 longer screws back in across the back. One on the top left, one on the top right, and one at the center at the bottom. With these 3 screws installed here, this is going to allow us to put the cassette mechanism back in. The cassette mechanism will go back in. There are 2 little open tabs here on the front of the mechanism that have to go down on 2 pins here. This will align all the screws through the front face once you put that back on, and the 2 screws in the back. We'll install the 2 screws in the back first, and this will allow us to secure the mech so that we put the ribbon cable into its connector over here. The mech doesn't fall out when we turn it upside down or move it and rip the cable. Now with these 2 back screws in, again we're going to check that the collar is up on this connector down here next to the head. This cable has to be pushed down into the middle of the connector while the sides are up, which can be somewhat difficult. There isn't a lot of room here, but you can usually tell when it pops back down into the connector, just like that. And at the same time, we're going to push the collar back down to lock it in place. As for the opposite side, we're going to install a connector in, and then we're going to take these wires here, these and reroute them. These connectors are keyed, so they only go back into the spot in one place. We're going to pull this wire down a little bit so that we can put this hold down right over it and put it down so that it keeps it out of the cassette mechanism. Next, we're going to come back with our front face. Again, the 6 screws here, they're all black screws. The 2 across the front of the cassette here that secure it to the frame. And then we have the 4 outside screws that secure this plate to the frame of the stereo as well. This is a pretty simple repair. Not something we've seen, like I say earlier. We have 2 in the shop right now, which has never happened, so they both seem to have the same problem. I've looked at the other as well. This one was a little bit cleaner than the other one. The other one has the leakage underneath the component that was in the front here was a lot worse. It has like 2 open traces there, so we're going to fix those traces in the other radio as well. That'll allow us to get that one together and hopefully get these out of the shop repaired, other than cassette working. Again, if you have any comments, please, comments are welcome. If you have questions, email or call us. We're willing to help. Now we're going to snap the cover back on. Bring back the face. Place the face in front here. Lock it in. We're going to see which way the curve is on our trim panel. Place that in. We're going to power this up and get it out of the shop. Hope this video has been helpful. Please subscribe, and thank you for watching.